Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and we're going to do another viewer games show. This will get us caught up. So we've got, I think, 6 games, and it's actually a very interesting collection. So let's start now. In the first game, Lawas, or at least that's his old handle maybe. His chess videos handle is Meridur H or something like that. Anyway, he has black, and his opponent is about 230 points higher rated, so it's a nice achievement for him to win the game. So he wants to know basically if the attack that he used in the game was premature or not. Okay, so he had black, so let's go ahead and give it to him from his perspective. So we have Petrov, and white declines with knight c3, and we end up with the 3 knights, or kind of a rare opening. All right, now here white should just take this pawn. So castles, and black gets it back, but has to give up the bishop pair. And we have a kind of a structure that can arise in the Petrov. For example, the currently popular knight c3 lines of the Petrov. But white at least has the bishop pair. Not that it's doing a great deal at this point, but it can be a long-term advantage. Anyway, this is how white is probably supposed to play this. Can also play bishop to c4. But I don't think that promises anything after knight c6. Anyway, well, also, let me think. What else can be done after bishop c4? Yeah, you can play knight c6. You can also just play d6 or castling. Even bishop takes c3 is certainly possible here too. So this, and then d6. And actually, this looks pretty reasonable. Again, of course, white has the bishop here, but this formation against this dark square bishop is quite effective, I've found. Not in this exact position, but in some similar ones. Okay, so anyway, white played d3, which is really insipid. Now here black played knight c6, or sorry, played d5, which is fine. Knight c6 is normally the move that I would prefer here, just because by playing this first and then d5 next, you cut out the possibility of knight takes e5 here. The thing is, though, that knight takes e5 is not very good, so it may be worth giving up this possibility to white. Sorry. So queen e7 looks very effective. If the knight retreats, then d4 or d takes e4 are both quite good. If d4, then knight e4, takes, and then both castling or even knight to d7. Both moves are rather unpleasant for white to face. I think black has a definite edge here. So in light of this, I'll just show you a funny game. So instead of queen e7, there's some game in the database that went like this. Castles, queen e7, f4, d4, and now instead of playing a3, b4, breaking the pin, white just decided to sack a piece, and it's kind of, it's pretty entertaining. Okay, and then here knight e5, fe5, and then black decided he didn't want to, well, okay, first of all, at this point he's given back the piece already, so the idea was knight e4, the idea bishop b4, queen h4 check. So dc, but now rook to d8, forces bishop b4 anyway, and in this position white's up a pawn, but black is certainly has a better position. The opposite color bishops are definitely going to favor black here. So I think we can say that knight takes e5 is not the way to go. Of course, d3 is really not a very good move. I mean, this is certainly dubious. Okay, so d5, ed, knight d5, bishop d2. Here, white played bishop c3, which is, or sorry, black played bishop c3, which is not a mistake, but I think knight c6 is better. I'd prefer to keep the tension here. Basically, what we have is a Steinitz defense in the Ruy Lopez, but with colors reversed, and so white with an extra tempo. But really, the Steinitz defense, I mean, it doesn't equalize with black, and an extra tempo is definitely not going to give white anything remotely resembling an advantage. I mean, white probably equalizes, but that's about it. So, and it's not really a tempo-intensive kind of variation. All right, now here white should play b takes c3. I mean, by playing bishop c3, white gets neither the bishop pair nor a clean pawn structure. All right, so the next few moves are pretty straightforward. And here I think black makes a mistake, although it's a very natural move. It's the kind of move that he should want to make sooner or later, but he should play something more patient, like queen to d6 or rook e8, something where he's just figuring out how to bring his major pieces into play. Instead, he plays f5, and this, as I said, is a reasonable idea. I mean, black would love to increase his control over the center and start building on the king side, but the problem is that his e5 pawn is weak and, in fact, just drops off if white were to play bishop f1. Okay, double attack on the e pawn, and then queen to e2. And even a move like e4 isn't going to help, because after d takes e4, f takes e4, queen takes e4, the bishop on e6 is going to be under attack. So this is really not a very good approach for black at all. This would be good for white. Not winning, but certainly to his advantage. He's basically getting the e pawn for free. So instead, white played a poor move, played d4, and this really justified black's strategy. So now the attack goes very nicely. e4. Okay, white can play knight to d2, and the position is still not really bad for white at all. It would be, I don't know, probably objectively equal, but maybe a little more comfortable, practically speaking, for black. But certainly anybody's game still. After knight e5, black is definitely better, and he finishes off very nicely. So takes, queen g5. And now f5, f4, f3 is certainly the big idea. Okay, white plays queen to d4, so that way on f4 there's queen takes e4, but black has the right idea. He plays rook a to d8. Doesn't care about the a pawn. What matters is getting this pawn rolling. So this is right and very nicely done. Okay, queen b7, f3, very good, bishop f1, takes. Okay, and now a very important moment in the game, and you might want to figure out what you would play here with black. Well, I think by far the easiest way to proceed is bishop to d5. So we would like to play, I mean, you see this bishop on g2. We want to gang up on it. So just play this. The queen runs away. Let's say queen to b5. Or, okay, well, let's start with queen takes c7. So here, simply e3, and everything falls. I mean, the only way to avoid an immediate catastrophe, well, it's all immediate catastrophe. f3, bishop takes f3, rook e2. Stops mate, but hey, you're losing the rook and you're still in big trouble. A better try would be queen to b5, but it's only marginally better because after queen f1, e takes f2 is complete demolition, as is rook takes f2. So probably the best that white can do is to play the miserable h4, and at the very worst, black can just take and enjoy a piece-up ending. Now, white has two pawns for it, but white's pawns are absolutely worthless. They're all weak, all six of them. And rook to d2 is coming, e3 check is coming. The e5 pawn can be won at black's leisure as well, so this is just completely hopeless. In the game, black played an even better move, objectively speaking. Better if you're a computer, but if you're a human, I don't think it's really very good. So he played rook takes f2. And this works, but if white plays the testing king takes f2, you really have to see a lot. So, for instance, rook f8, king g1 is just nothing. Bishop to d5, at the very best, is giving black the kind of play he could have had in the game, but one rook with one rook less. So the best move after king f2 is rook to d2 check, rook e2, takes, queen g2. Okay, now if the king goes to the back rank, there's queen g1 and queen a1, so the king should come up. Okay, now if king d2, e3 check, and then black takes the queen, so king d4, and now crucial. I mean, if you didn't see this, then this whole combination is bad. Queen f2 check, and remarkably, the only square for white, well, the only move that white has is king takes, and then queen g2 check, followed by queen takes b7. So this is a pretty substantial calculation, and there are quite a few twists and turns along the way as well before you might find your way here. So if you see all of this, then great. I mean, all I can do is compliment you on your tactical acuity, but unless you really saw that clearly and realized that all of the other alternatives the white might try were hopeless, then I think rook takes f2 is practically a bad decision when bishop to d5 followed by e3 is just so simple. But, okay, again, if you saw it, then hats off to you. So anyway, rook f2, and white just played very compliantly queen takes e4, and now after rook d to d2, it's very easy. Not only is black tripled up on the bishop, but bishop to d5 is also threatened. So the game ended fairly straightforwardly, like this. And now black finished with in style here with rook takes g2, and white gave up the ghost. So very nice game. Obviously there's a serious, a mistake in that white could have won the e-pawn, but that aside, I think it was a very nice game, and the final attack was very well executed. Okay, so on to our next game here. So this was, again, I think this was again with black. I think black was the player suggesting this. So this is Motor 07 against Wuzzy, and also black is also known as the Chesser. So he says about this that it was a scary game. It almost gave him a heart attack because it went from white winning to drawish to black's better to drawish to white's having a huge advantage to black, having checkmate in 5. And it's a blitz game too. So, all right, I don't want to spend too much time on a blitz game, but it is a very fun game, and there are some points worth discussing. Okay, so e4, c5, f4. All right, so first of all, I don't think this is so great. This old tall gambit, I think, is still completely satisfactory with d5. So for this reason, white usually plays knight c3 to prevent that. And black plays d5. So anyway, knight c6, knight f3, and now e5. Okay, and this is kind of frisky here. I mean, white is trying to blast the position open as fast as possible, trying to get the f file into play, but it's, I think, premature. I mean, this pawn on e5, okay, it can either become a weakness, or if white ends up playing e takes d6, then he's wasting a lot of time to make an exchange that's favorable for black. I mean, look at this position here. White's pawn on e4 is more effective than black's pawn on d6. So black would be very, very happy, all things being equal, to have those two pawns just disappear from the board. So after e5, the move I like the best here is just knight h6. So it takes care of the f7 problem, prepares to castle, controls f5, which white has very graciously bestowed on us by playing e5 so quickly. And now we are threatening to take the pawn on e5. And of course, if white plays e takes d6, queen takes d6, we're very, very happy with that too. So de, fe, and again, I think knight h6 is the way to go, although I would have preferred, again, to play it the first time. All right, so e6 I don't like so much. I mean, you can see weak squares, weak dark squares forming as a result on d6 and f6. The bishop on c8 is shut in, but, it does kill the diagonal. The bishop on c4 is diagonal to f7, so that's a plus. Now here I think white should play patiently with d3 or queen to e2, or maybe, well, okay, we do want to keep the e5 pawn protected, but instead he thinks he's polymorphy and he plays d4. And blitz, why not? Okay, well, black played c takes d4, knight g5. Again, knight h6 I think is simpler. Preparing to castle, you don't have this kind of loose knight on e5, and all the advantages in the position remain. But, okay, knight e5 is objectively fine, but again, it's dangerous. So bishop to f4, and here black blunders. Okay, he played bishop to f6, which is just an outright blunder. Takes, knight f7. Okay, not game over. In fact, he goes on to win, but it is winning for white. So black should just play knight takes c4, and on knight f7, okay, remember it's chess and not checkers, so you don't have to take this knight. You're up a piece. When black takes the rook on h8, you can recapture it. 2 pieces for a rook, or a rook and a pawn even, is in a middle game, generally speaking, very good for the minor pieces, because you can see it's not so easy for white's rooks, at least the rook on a1, to do anything meaningful. Meanwhile, black's pieces dominate the center in a position like queen d5 takes and takes. Right, so this is great for black. Or it could play queen b6, hitting b2, and maybe with the idea of d3, and bishop takes b2 in some cases as well. All right, so that would have been just winning for black. Instead, bishop f6, takes, knight f7, queen c7, and the position is still a bit messy, but white is probably winning here. And the best move would just be knight to a3. I mean, the rook on h8 can't run away. Queen takes f7 is not a good idea. So Knight a3 develops a piece and protects the bishop on c4, and white should maintain a comfortable, if maybe even winning advantage here. Okay, instead after knight h8, black should play queen takes c4. Grab this guy. Okay, instead bishop h2. It's tempting. I mean, you want to start bringing pieces around the white king, but it's okay to grab some material too. So king h1, knight f6, and now, okay, I don't understand why white doesn't play rook f6. This just wins. Well, I mean, I understand in the sense that it's a blitz game, but objectively there's no obvious reason not to take. So after bishop to e5, for instance, white has the nice little Zwischenschach, bishop to b5 check, in other words, the in-between check before running away with the rook. So that way on bishop to d7, rook f7 is very strong. And if the king moves to d8, knight f7. If the king goes up, then rook f7. Okay, so let's say queen e5. Well, now just rook f1. If queen h8, we see one of the drawbacks of bishop h2, which is that white can simply grab it. And if bishop to g3, well, queen f3 looks completely fine as well. White is just up a lot of material and has an attack too. So queen f3, okay, it's not losing or anything, but it's certainly not the best move. Okay, bishop to e5, thank you, we keep our piece. Here I would play bishop to b5 check. White's happy to exchange off. I mean, he's up a rook for 2 pawns, and this preserves the bishop with tempo. Okay, instead bishop to d3. Okay, here black should probably play queen g7, eyeing not only the knight, but the h6 square. Okay, but he played here. And now knight takes g6 was a mistake. So you should just play knight a3. Again, develop your pieces. And there's no rush. I mean, white can always play knight takes g6, to grab some material for the piece, if need be. But, there's no rush yet. I mean, at least wait till it's threatened. And also, got to be careful about that because the h-file could really harm white. So it may be best to forsake the gain of a pawn or two to keep one's king alive. So knight a3, let's say king e7, knight c4. Bishop c6, queen h3 here, and rook a to e1. And it's a very kind of weird position, but in fact, because of the pressure on the e-file, it looks like white enjoys a nice advantage. But practically speaking, this would be murky in a blitz game. However, after knight g6, okay, now it's black who definitely has the upper hand here. And okay, knight to d2 is maybe a little bit inaccurate as well, but it's already a tough position to play. So here, black can win with this. Rook h8, king g8, and now we see, okay, bishop h2 doesn't really get anywhere. The king can go to f2, but, okay, the other diagonal is open as well. We just have to get our pieces on it. So d3. Okay, well, white can play c3 to keep the bishop off, but the queen can still go to c5 or b6. So let's say bishop c6 first, maximizing our attacking prospects and doing it with tempo as well. Let's say here, and now queen b6, and white falls apart. So for instance, rook f2, and now black can either play the prosaic bishop to g3 or the flashy bishop h2 check, and then bishop to g3, which just wins on the spot. There are 2 mate threats, queen takes f2 and rook h1. So this is just game over. All right, so that's rook h8, and it's just very natural. I mean, we're bringing another piece into play with tempo. But bishop c6 isn't bad either. The one slight drawback is that maybe white has a little more time to defend with queen a3 check and queen h3, and it can cover the h-file. So certainly white's worse. Black should probably win this in the long run too. For instance, this variation is winning for black. But anyway, the point is trying to control the h-file gives white more of a chance. In the game, white played knight e4, stepping into this pin, and bad things happen. So check, check, and now black can just win big material with knight e4. Because if bishop e4, rook f8 wins the queen. And if he doesn't recapture, then he's just down on material with a horrible position. So instead, black blunders with bishop to g3 check. Of course, white should just take it, and then life is just fine. Rook f8 is no good because of bishop f3. So black's best is probably this, but then he's down the exchange. Okay, instead, white blundered with king e2, and really every move here is a blunder, but it's a complicated position. Again, in blitz, I mean, it's easy to make these mistakes. So here, black should just take, and then play queen e5, let's say king d3, bishop e8, and white is falling apart here. Okay, the threats, bishop h5 trapping the queen. So this, for instance, wins the white queen. If the queen goes back to here, then loses it that way. And if it goes back to d1, then bishop to b5, and then there's a mate. Okay, so instead black played bishop to b5 check, not as good here. King d2. Okay, now bishop h4 is kind of unclear, but played this, which is a blunder because it hangs the knight. So that's why bishop h4 was better. So after this, okay, white can play queen d4 and should just win here. For instance, like this, up a piece and a pawn. The king is really safe, so there's no real danger to white's king. There is danger to black's king. However, the last laugh is on white. So he took the rook, and he's up a rook, but it's going to be down a king. Queen f4 check forces mate. King d1 is the only legal move. Queen g4 check. Okay, now if king d2 check and mate. So he played king c1, but now bishop f4 check. Knight e2 takes, take or check, and mate. Okay, very, very messy game, obviously. Certainly either side could have won much sooner, but very interesting and good tactical exercise there. Okay, the next game is a lot cleaner, I'm happy to say. This was played by David Grant. I don't recall what his handle was on the server. So he's white, and this is played against a former opponent, or an opponent who had beaten him some months before, but this game he got his revenge. So they're both about 1850 or so. Okay, so Grant has white, David Grant has white, and his very, very good name for a chess player opponent, Jeffrey Bishop, has black. All right, so here is kind of interesting. So he notes that his opponent's normally a Sicilian player, and so e5 was what his opponent came up with instead. And so I like that after knight c3, knight c6, he said he thought for about 10 minutes trying to figure out what to do against it. So, he thought about g3 lines and bishop c4, but decided on f4, which I think is both a pretty good line in its own right. I know I try to avoid this with black, and but it's also, I think, a very effective weapon against someone who's kind of new to e5. So this, I think, was a very good use of his time and a good choice in the game. So e takes f4, knight f3, and here I think black definitely should play g5. This is the only testing move here. So after d6, d4, now g5 is not really as good, and bishop to g4 is just definitely not so good. So takes, 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 and this is really a very nice position for white. His king is in no danger. I mean, queen h4 leads to nothing after bishop to g3. White has this very secure and attractive pawn center, the two bishops, even a lead in development, slight lead in development. So this is really just a complete success for white as far as the opening goes. You still got to win the game, but it's quite comfortable. Okay, so here I would have played bishop to e7 with black. I would try to get this bishop into play first, and if I can get rid of white's bishop here without making any big concessions, that would be useful too. So knight f6, queen d2. Here maybe I would consider knight h5, but after bishop e3, queen h4 check, I think queen f2 is a very effective move. So takes, takes, and this is a terrific ending for white. So that's one of the great things about the King's Gambit, is that it's not just an attacking weapon, but you can get these really terrific endgame positions in it as well. Okay, black played knight e7, and white just develops and enjoys a very pleasant edge. Here, white played bishop to c4, which is not a bad move, but I don't like it that much just yet. I would prefer to move like king to b1. which is just generally useful. It gets the king off of the h6 c1 diagonal, keeps the a2 pawn protected, and it's also a waiting move. And the point is that, okay, if black castles, then we can just start running the h pawn up the board. If black plays something like c6, well, we might choose something different to do with our light-squared bishop. So it's again just kind of a flexible move, very useful in its own right, but it also waits to see how black handles the position. So after bishop c4, c6, okay, we're giving we're giving black at least a little bit of a target. Of course, white's still much better, but this at least gives black a scintilla of counterplay. All right, h4, and here maybe knight h5. So again, prefer to maybe blockade this. Try to fight for these dark squares. I mean, it's the only thing that black really can even have, so I would try to go for that. But after queen h2, let's say bishop h4 and rook d to g1. Certainly white is in very, very good shape here, but at least black has a pawn for his suffering. Okay, well in the game he tried b5. It's not a bad approach either. Bishop b3. Okay, again he could try knight h5, but he plays a5, and now white plays h5. So very good, not just reacting to what black is doing, but going on with his own ideas as well. Here black played knight f8. Maybe I would consider a4. It's not that this is a great move, but it's an attempt to change the nature of the game. I mean, if black basically keeps reacting to what white is doing, he's going to get rolled. So it's I think important for black to try something to change the complexion of the game. All right, knight f8 is not it. Okay, so white now plays a4, b4. Okay, again, it's keeping lines closed. And I like what white did a lot here. So he played queen to g2. So the point is, okay, he's going to play knight e2, but he gets the queen to a more active location first. Now, if black takes, then queen g7. Okay, hits the rook. And if rook to g8, of course, bishop f7, and white's winning material. Maybe black can play cb, and then this funny move, knight to d5, hitting the bishop on e3, and after ed, bishop f6. Okay, that's the good news is that black is getting a little life. The bad news is that white's still thoroughly in charge, and his attacking prospects definitely beat black's. And he's also a pawn up, still has the bishop pair. The e-file is open, so this is not really salvation. But again, black has to try something for counterplay. Okay, instead he sits in the box with rook to g8. Okay, now knight e2, knight e6, and now f4. So here we come. d5, f5, knight c7, e5, knight e4, rook d to g1. Okay, basically what white is up to is he's going to play f6 and start cracking open black's. Start cracking open the files on the king's side. So if he plays fg, then the f file can be useful, for instance. Okay, well here black decides that he's got to try to do something, but it doesn't help so much. So he played c5. Now here maybe the one move that I would, really offer some criticism, but I think is a mistake, though white is still better after it. So here white played d takes c5. And I think he loses a fair amount of his advantage with this. Probably the best is f6, and then knight f4. And, okay, c4 doesn't work because you just play bishop takes c4, and the knight on e4 is hanging. And there's also a second threat, which we can see after rook c8, which is knight takes d5, and now the knight on e4 is loose, and once that d5 pawn drops, then black's position is going to collapse. So that, I think, would have been the most effective winning approach. Wins material, blasts the board open for the bishops, and gets rid of black's only active piece. Okay, instead after dc, takes here, certainly white is still much better, but okay, at least black gets a moment to breathe. But even here, I mean, white reasserts himself very quickly. So the threat's knight to d6 check, and then queen takes d5. And this doesn't really help. Okay, so it's check again, so white doesn't have knight to d6 yet, but okay, after this, the board is wide open. Knight d6 is threatened. Queen takes d5 is threatened. Of course, queen e5 is a blunder because of rook to e1. it's not as if castling queenside is going to be of much use to black either. Maybe the best is queen to e6. So trying to so it gets out of the fork, it covers the d5 pawn, but all right. I mean, it's still a lousy position, and white can choose any number of moves here. I mean, you can always play knight to d4 if you want. You can put a rook on the c file, rook on the d file. It's all good. Maybe even queen c2, hitting h7, and also eyeing penetration on the c file. Anyway, that didn't happen. Black played king f8, queen d5, knight to d6, and I assume black resigned here. His queen's attacked, queen f7 mate is threatened, the rook on a8 is loose if the queen comes up to protect the mate on f7. So very nice, very convincing win by white, and again an excellent opening choice and very good thinking, very good decision making in the opening. Okay, on to the next game. So there we go. This is an anonymous player against Chevelle, and Chevelle had black, but lost this. Okay, well, it's Chevelle's beloved Marshall Gambit. So let's zip ahead to this point. Yeah, and here white played d4, which is a reasonably popular and practical anti-Marshall, heading for a kind of open Ruy Lopez type of position. So e takes d4, e5, knight e4, and then here white normally plays c takes d4, and then after bishop f5, knight c3, takes, and queen d7, we have our basic, kind of the starting position of the main line. So white can try bishop to g5, or bishop c2, or h3. All of these moves have been played. Okay, well, instead of c takes d4, the white played knight takes d4. And this is kind of a tricky move, but I think it's objectively probably a bad move. I think black may, in fact, have an advantage here. But he's got to play knight takes e5. All right, so the following analysis is from Dave Vigorito's new book on the Marshall Gambit, which I certainly recommend to all of you Marshall Gambiteers out there. So f3 is the key move. I mean, otherwise white's just down a pawn for nothing. So f3 attempts to take advantage of this knight shish kebab on the e file. Well, if the knight moves, rook takes e5 just wins. So black has to have something better than that, and c5 is the move here. Okay, well now white has at least 4 moves that we can discuss. 2 are outright bad, and 2 are playable, but still seem to be favorable for black at the end of the day. So the 2 bad moves are knight retreats. So if knight e2, then c4. And, well, first of all, there's no more skewer on the e file, so if the white bishop retreats, so can black's, except maybe bishop c5. That could also be considered, or queen b6, but just knight f6 is very simple. Yeah, that way we don't have to worry about knight to d4. Also, if knight c2, well, again c4, and the bishop's trapped. So the 2 reasonable moves are bishop to f4 and f takes e4. Okay, if bishop to f4, trying to put as many pieces on pre as possible, then bishop f6. Bishop takes e5. Okay, if f e4, just cd4, no problem. So bishop e5, and then knight c6. So again, for a moment, it looks like this is just great for white. 3 black pieces are under attack, plus the pawn on d5. But bishop h2 check saves the day. And not only that, but it gives black an advantage. Queen h4, queen f2. Okay, now if king h1, then bishop h3 is winning. If you take the bishop, knight to g3 is mate. If rook to g1, then queen h4 threatens mate and threatens knight to f2 check. So white has to go along with the repetition, but black doesn't have to repeat. Queen g3. Okay, again, if king h1, knight f2 check, so king g1. But now knight g5 is actually pretty interesting. If king f1, then bishop to h3 is strong. And if king h1, queen h4 check, okay, knight h3 check. Now, white has to take, because if king f1, queen f2 is checkmate, and if the king goes to the h-file, then knight f2 wins the queen. So takes, bishop h3, threatening queen g3 followed by queen g2 mate, queen d2, check, and now a nice little combination, bishop g2 check. Okay, if king to g1, then bishop f3 is very strong. So takes, queen g1, rook a to e8. White does not want to trade queens because then the knight and rook are going to be stuck there forever. So knight a3, but now queen d2. And the threat's queen h6 check, followed by taking the knight on c6. Rook e6 is also a huge threat, followed by rook to h6, mating. So black is nearly winning here. This is not good for white. So back to knight takes e5, f3, c5. fe4 is the other main move. But now after c takes d4, e takes d5, bishop to d6, material is equal, and black's pieces are more aggressively posted. And white's kingside is rather bare. I mean, you can see knight to g4, queen h4, things like this are going to happen rapidly. So bishop to f4 fights for the diagonal and hits the knight. So rook e8. And now, okay, if c takes d4, black has this nice trick, knight f3 check. So queen takes f3, hangs the rook on e1, and if gf3, bishop f4. And yeah, white is up a pawn, but his pawns are terrible. Black has a very good bishop pair. White's king's position is weakened. Black will finish developing more quickly and more meaningfully. So I think black is clearly better here as well. Okay, so quite a bit of theory there, but it's good to know. And so knight takes d4 is not best. So knight takes d4 and turn is not best. C takes d4, and then here black blunders with bishop to e6. White is not threatening anything yet, because if f3, knight to g5, h4, the black knight can drop back to e6. Okay, so this guy has this retreating path open to him, but not after bishop to e6. So better would have been f5, or bishop to f5, or c5. Anyway, after this, white is winning, though it's still some technical difficulties. Knight f3. Okay, knight h3 is worth considering too, keeping the white queen away from the king side for the moment. So knight f3 here, and now white should just play g3. Okay, on this, for instance, knight c3, hitting the pawn on d5, bishop c2, and no real problems here for white, sorry, in cashing in. But after rook to d1, well, now it gets exciting. f6, and all of a sudden, black has some serious counterplay. Okay, best is now probably bishop to f4 with kind of a crazy idea. Okay, bishop f4 makes sense, but because it guards a lot of squares around the king, but the reason why it's a little bit crazy is that, of course, it's giving up the piece to this trick. But now, white plays bishop takes d5, and the threat's bishop takes e6. If bishop takes d5, rook takes d5 is quite good. But best for now, black now is queen takes d5. So very sharp stuff here. Rook d5, rook f4, and now queen f4, giving it back, followed by rook c5. And white is probably better, but still very messy. Black has two pretty good bishops. So definitely it's still a game with all three results possible. All right, but this is not so easy to find already, and white chose queen to h5, and he's in fact in big trouble now. F takes e5, queen e5, bishop f2 check, king h1, and here black played a very poor move, I think, queen to d7. I mean, it certainly makes sense. You're protecting the bishop, and you're keeping the pawn on d5 protected. You're clearing the path for the second rook to come into the game. You're threatening rook f5. So in all of those ways, it makes a lot of sense. And black still has very good compensation here. But the more direct queen to h4 check is very, very strong. First of all, okay, of course, white has to play queen h2. And now the key idea, though, is queen to g4. And the point of this is that now we're not only threatening things like rook f5 followed by rook to h5, but there's a second idea. So let's say white plays knight to c3. Maybe knight to d2 is a little bit better, but black is winning in any case. Here, black has a very elegant winning, I don't know, maybe a mini combination. See if you can figure out what it is. Well, the answer is bishop to g3. And this just wins directly, because whichever way the queen goes, something bad happens the other way. So either the queen keeps the h-file under control or the back rank under control, but she can't do both. So if queen h3, queen d1, and then rook f1 is mate. If she goes the other way, well, queen h4 and queen h2 is mate. I guess you could be a little bit sadistic here after queen g1 and play queen h5 check. Oh, no, it doesn't work. Queen h2, I was thinking queen d1 and rook f1, but then the queen can return to g1. But again, just this is the end. So queen d7 is a little bit slow. It kind of lets white off the hook a little bit, but it's still very, very difficult for white to survive. And indeed, after bishop c2, which makes good sense, black is still winning. Bishop g4 is probably the best approach, with a similar idea to what we just saw, that if rook f1, bishop takes d4, takes, and the back rank problem is too much. So this is winning for black. Okay, well, bishop to f5 wasn't quite as good, but it's also a pretty good move. Bishop to b3, and now, unfortunately, though, black blunders. So bishop to e4 is quite attractive, threatening queen h3 with mate next move. Queen h3 check, queen h2, bishop g2 mate, but it just misses queen takes e4. So black had to play c6, just protecting the pawn. Then rook a to e8 is next, and white will disintegrate very, very quickly here. So after this, the rest of the game is pretty straightforward. White won without giving black any further chances. So we can rather quickly look at the moves. Okay, it was a nice move, pinning the rook to the queen and covering the h-file. g4, and okay, white doesn't have any light squared bishop, so there's no real problem on the diagonal here. And that takes care of the diagonal as well. Okay, and since queen takes d4, queen e8 is mate next move. And okay, it doesn't hurt that white is up a rook in two pieces at this point. Black resigned. Okay, very interesting game. I mean, it's lopsided at the end, but that's just because of the one blunder with bishop to e4. Okay, next game. This is, I think, our last game of the series, submitted by, I'm not sure how to say it, Xitvono, Xitvono, and it's a Najdorf. Very interesting one against an anonymous player. Okay, so it goes into the classical main line for quite a while. And then here, instead of b5, which is the main move, black played h6, which is also an important move. Now here, white can choose between bishop f6 and bishop h4. Well, h4 has been played here too. I don't think it's that fantastic, but it's playable as well. Anyway, if bishop h4, the typical idea that black has in these lines in the main line, bishop g5 Sicilian, where he plays h6, is to follow up with g5, then hit the queen like this, and this is a kind of a typical position. If h3, h takes g5. So on this, it takes, and black can play rook h6 or queen d8 or queen e7, and the position is roughly equal, but very easy for black to play. This knight on e5 is very good. His king is reasonably safe, so it's, again, fairly balanced. So bishop f6 is, I think, probably the more, well, certainly the more aggressive choice. It leads to far more dynamic play than bishop to h4 does. Now, in the line where black plays b5 here, after bishop f6, knight f6, or black plays knight takes f6, but here, after h6, bishop f6 might be more interesting. Now that g5 is no threat. Right, so that's the one benefit of h6. g5 is not on the docket, so we can play this. So here, white should play h4, and now black can choose between queen b6, so again, justifying the position of the bishop on f6 before g5 comes into play. Or you can even play g5 with a similar idea to what we saw a moment ago, that after this, when the f4 pawn disappears, whether black takes it or white moves it, then the e5 square will belong to black for the foreseeable future. So that's why that would make more sense here. Okay, black played knight f6, and now h4 would be, I think, definitely the way for white to go, followed by g5 with traditional attacking play. Okay, instead after f5, okay, f5 is, it's giving up a lot of dark squares. So I mean, unless you're sure you can break through on the light squares, you got to be a little careful about it. So here, the standard response would be e5, keeping all these kingside line's closed. Now, the d5 square could be a slight weakness, but it's not really so easy for white to do anything with it. Okay, well here, white can choose between the two retreats. I think knight to b3 is the better retreat. And just to give one sample line here, okay, b5. White can play knight to d5, but takes, bishop b7, and the d5 square is not really meaningful from white's point of view. So a3, okay, now bishop to b7. All right, and this is, again, all part of a fight for d5 for the moment. So h4, and now a nice move by black, rook c8. Very important because it takes away g5 on account of knight takes e4. The knight can't be taken because of the checkmate. So bishop to d3, and now, okay, black has a choice between a couple of approaches. He should be concerned about g5, and there are at least two decent ways to deal with this. One is to play simply knight to d7. This might be the best way, actually. So the bishop covers g5, and the knight may jump to a square like c5, or maybe more likely b6, and then from there go to a4 or c4, or even support d6 to d5 at some point. Another approach, which is often reasonable, and I don't think it's bad here, is h5, with the idea of dropping this knight on g4, anchoring it there. So this can be played as well. And sometimes this trick is used in the Kara's attack in the Scheveningen. All right, so that's about all I want to say about the theory of this. I could say more, but that's enough. So b5, though, this is a bit crazy. Now here I would have thought, e5 is the obvious move. Okay, so you see e5, and you see, all right, doesn't work because black has bishop to b7. But you might notice that bishop to b7 loosens the e6 square. So if you put those two things together, then you can come up with the idea of just playing f takes e6 first, and then e5, because I'm bishop to b7, now knight takes e6. If the queen runs away, well, we don't have any real problems there because the knight on f6 is hanging, the pawn on g7 is hanging, so this would be perfectly delightful for white. So bishop f3, well, check, knight a8, and white is winning. So if knight takes g4, then bishop e2 is very good. Okay, remember, white's up a full rook here, so just playing bishop e2 and rook a8 leaves black down in exchange for nothing. Or if rook a8, well, e takes f6, again, it's a disaster for black. So I think just f takes e6 and then e5 is a complete refutation of this idea for black. So instead, white played knight d takes b5, and this one really isn't so dangerous. Okay, takes here, and now black's best is probably king f8, just getting out of the way here. And okay, now if fe, then queen a7, and okay, if e takes f7, bishop takes g4 wins the exchange. The rook on a8 is covered, and if white doesn't play ef, then black plays bishop e6 with a perfectly good game. So instead he played this, and now, okay, it's a little less clear. All right, e5 is extremely sharp here, hitting the knight, hitting the rook, and now there's no bishop to b7. I mean, that's why bishop to d7 was a bit of a mistake. But it looks like black can play this nice countersack of just castling kingside. Takes, let's say takes and takes. And although white's up a pawn, well, you have three open files for black to play with on the king side, on the queen side against white's king. The bishop on f6 is a monster, so this is a very unpleasant position for white. Okay, white played fe. Here I think black can play fe, and again on e5, castle. Takes, bishop f6, and in fact the difference with the open f file is in black's favor because, well, it gives him a tempo. There's the threat of bishop to g5 check, among other things, and I would say, well, also bishop takes c3 is a threat, and I would say that white is lost here. So after f takes e6, bishop takes b5 was a mistake, although even here too, black is in very good shape. Okay, if knight takes b5, queen c4, let's say e5, rook c8, threatening mate. Now queen e4, so this saves all the stuff, all the goodies. Okay, ef7, and here you got to be careful. Okay, you don't want to take because queen b3 check, and the knight on f6 drops. You can move it to d5, and then rook takes d5. But king f8 here, and although white has 4 pawns for the piece, again, a lot of these pawns are going to fall very quickly, and black has excellent play against white's king, and elsewhere too. So after queen e4, knight e4, for instance, knight f2 is a threat. So black is definitely much better here. All right, well, white played e takes f7, king f7, knight b5. Here I would prefer queen to c4, but queen c5 was okay too. Rook d5, queen c4, knight d6 check. Okay, this is, I think, a mistake too, but it's already a tough position. But here takes. Okay, this is fine, but why not rook a2? I mean, this just looks like it should be crushing. Okay, so this is fine, and now rook a2, and again, I think white's position is going to fall apart very rapidly here. So there's no real attack to speak of, at least from white's half of the board. Black has a real attack. So I mean, if e5, if nothing else, there's rook a1 check, then you take the rook, and then the knight can move when white recaptures with queen takes h1. Also, no, also. I was going to say e5, queen g4, but then queen to b7 check. So e5, rook a1 is the main idea. Well, black caught a break here, or white caught a break. Black played queen e4, and rook f6 was just the end of the game. So a rather abrupt finish, but overall, I mean, clearly both sides made mistakes. The key thing is, I mean, you have to always be aware that on b5, e5 is really the critical response, and you have to look and see what tricks are available there. So if white had noticed the danger to e6, let me go back to that point. Yeah, if black had noticed, or white had noticed the problems with e6, I think he would have found fe and then e5, so that bishop to b7 could be met by knight takes e6, winning. So, okay, hopefully this discussion at least helped you to learn some of the key motifs in these bishop to g5 lines, which are really fascinating. I mean, it's a little bit unfortunate that the poisoned pawn is so dominant. Dominant as a drawing weapon, but dominant nonetheless, because these other variations are just so incredibly fascinating that it's a shame they don't get played more often. Because again, the poisoned pawn, which is itself extremely interesting, but just one interesting line of many. But because it supplanted the seventh move alternatives. Anyway, I believe that's it. Let me make sure here. I don't think there were any other games. Yep, that was it. So hope you enjoyed this. I found the collection of games quite entertaining. I hope you did too. And anyway, I will see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.